Welcome to the Homeless Conservative, show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher. I'm a political junkie, so that you don't necessarily have to be. We're trying this episode live because it's something I've been playing with. I did one live episode one night. I don't know, I guess it's just because I grew up listening to like sports talk radio and stuff like that. I feel like there's something fun about it being live. It's weird when I sit here and talk to a non-existent audience when I'm recording it. So I thought it might be fun to try to get a live audience in on these things. I don't know. See what happens. So thanks for being here, whether you're live or not, whether you're listening later, that's fine. Doesn't really matter. Just thought I'd spend today talking about some of the comments I've gotten on YouTube and stuff like that on some of my videos. I wanted to further expand the arguments on some of my things, just because I think some of these are valid points. Some of them are not. And instead of getting into it in the comments, I just thought I'd just reply to them via video, and don't really want to talk about the Trump trial anymore. That's over, the guilty verdict. I thought we could talk about some comments. That's the good stuff to get into. And I should specify, doing this whole thing, in no way am I offended by comments. I don't really care if you call me names. It doesn't bother me. My wife was off social media last year when I started this whole thing, and then she got back on and was kind of shocked when she saw the Instagram comments, was like, oh my gosh, they're so mean. I'm like, yeah, that's just people on the internet are mean behind a keyboard. It's kind of like, I feel like there's also that bubble when we're driving in our cars where we can yell and scream and flip people off, things that we would never do if we were actually, in face to face in front of these people. So I really don't take offense at anything in the comments, but I do like to have friendly discussions, and I'm all for having an argument back and forth. I'm all for people saying they think I'm wrong about something, or they think I'm whatever. That's what I think we need more of, is more dialogue. We need to actually talk about these issues, and just shouting each other down doesn't really work well. And not that that's not what most of the comments are, but I just thought I'd take a few of them. Before we get into that, though, I do just want to mention a couple sort of things going on. So you probably, if you can tell, I've got a sinus infection. I've had one for like most of the last week. And so I'm trying not to do anything gross, no snotting or sniffing or blowing my nose or anything while on this live broadcast, right? That would be not pleasant to your ears as you've got your AirPods in doing whatever you're doing, faking working or doing laundry or whatever you do while you listen to this. And what's weird about it is that I also recorded the next 2 weeks worth of episodes this past few days because I've got some stuff to work on. I really just needed to knock some episodes out. So I've got some more evergreen content coming with interviews with some people that I think you'll enjoy. But you're going to think potentially that it sounds like Blake's had a sinus infection for 3 weeks. No, it's not really the case. A little trick of the trade. Next 2 weeks episodes are pre-recorded. So I sound terrible on them, especially because one of them I recorded Monday morning after having gone to Dallas on Sunday night for a concert. Saw Bleachers. Bleachers, I'm confident, I'm sure Jack Antonoff and the band do not agree with me politically, but dang it, I'm going to give him a shout out. It was one of the best live bands I've ever seen. They were fantastic. It was such a fun show, but it did require us waking up at 5 a.m. to drive back to Oklahoma City. So I was tired with the sinus infection. So that episode's, I'm going to sound very, very bad, and I apologize for it. So I'll try to sound as normal as possible. I'm taking medication. I'm going to have sinus surgery eventually in September. So that's a personal update that you probably didn't need to know, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. So let's get into talking about some of these comments. As I mentioned, I'm not offended by any of this. I just am happy to have a discussion back and forth. I'm also going to call out some of the most common arguments that I've seen and push back to some of the especially short form content that I do on YouTube. And the comment section is not a great way to do that. And honestly, short form content is not a great way to talk about politics. It's just kind of, unfortunately, where we're at with social media. I make these short contents, either clips from these shows, or I write specific scripted shorts about specific topics. I'm trying to cram an idea into 60 seconds. 60 seconds, by the way, which further proves that the way we have the debate format for presidential debates is, or really any debates, I guess, but especially the presidential ones, is really dumb. To try to give a concise answer in 1 minute on something like, what's your foreign policy going to be? When we've got a Russia-Ukraine situation, we've got Israel-Gaza, we've got China-Taiwan, we've got all sorts of other geopolitical issues for Iran. We've got North Korea. We've got all, those are just the bad ones. We've also just got things like Haiti is completely controlled by drug lords now. Is that something we need to get involved with? Mexico has had 38 politicians assassinated in 2024 and just elected a new president. These are things that are going on around the world no matter what. And we expect the president to be able to answer in 1 minute what his foreign policy is going to be. The debate format's really bad. I am excited about the debates later this month just because I think they're going to be a train wreck. I think they will really show. I just don't see any way this won't be the case. When Donald Trump and Joe Biden get the CNN debate, it's not going to have an audience. So Trump cannot play to laughs or cheers or boos or anything like that. He's not going to have anyone to interact with other than the moderators and Joe Biden. I think it's going to be interesting. I think it will probably show us that neither one of these guys is qualified to be the president of the United States. Joe Biden is far too old. He is clearly losing a step, and we see article after article coming out where people are like, no, he's so great behind the scenes. I think Republicans are doing themselves a disfavor by pretending that he's already like he doesn't have any clue what's going on. I think he's having good days and bad days. Wall Street Journal just put out an article quoting, I think, like 45 sources, some of which say he's fine, some of which say we're actually worried about it. Obviously, you would expect people like Republicans to say so, but I believe them. People like Kevin McCarthy that are saying, look, I met with him when he was vice president. This is not the same guy. He's not at the same mental cognitive ability that he was 10 years ago. It's just not the same guy. He's declining, and that's not going to stop with Biden. So I'm curious how he's going to do in a 2-hour debate. I just don't think he can do it. People point to the State of the Union, and they're like, oh, he did fine there. And I think that was, one, a case of Republicans setting the bar way too low. I think they were trying to pretend he'd walk out there. He wouldn't be able to stand on his own. He'd be drooling. I think that why over-exaggerate it? It's bad enough. Plainly, our own eyes can see how bad it is. But there's these conspiracy theories going around that like he took some sort of medication that he juiced. I'm like, tell me what that medication is. If such a medication existed, why would he not be on it every single day? I'm not saying there's not medications that can't clarify your mind and stuff like that, but there's no medication that clearly just makes you not old and not appear to be old and can string sentences together and have cognitive abilities. If we had that medication, we wouldn't have the problem with like Alzheimer's and things like that we have. These conspiracy theories are so stupid because they set the bar so low, all he has to do is shuffle over it to not look old. I do think there's a significant difference, though. The State of the Union, he has a teleprompter in front of him. He's not going to have a teleprompter. I don't know what the rule is even on notes, but Joe Biden a lot of times can't get through a presser without a note card on who he's supposed to call on to ask the question and what the answer to the question might be. It's absolutely not okay, and I think it's a big problem. And Trump, honestly, not any better. Trump on a teleprompter, he can stay on track. He cannot stay on track outside of a teleprompter. It's gotten worse and worse. If you've listened to any of his interviews lately, he is off the rails. So that debate's going to be interesting. But again, to loop it back to what I was talking about, it's very hard to make a really good point on policy in 1 minute. And so these shorts, they are not all inclusive. I am having to kind of summarize some things to cram my thought into 1 minute. And so sometimes some of the nuance that I want to be there, because I'm very much all about the nuance of these discussions, because these are big issues and they're not going to be solved by 1 minute sound bites. And I'm not pretending that that's the case. It's just the nature of what I have to do to promote this thing. That's plain and simple what it is. I am just trying to give some short form content that might pique your interest, and then maybe you'll listen to the long form. I have much more nuanced conversations in the long form podcast like this. And so I thought I'd take some of the comments to those shorts and expand on them and say what I really meant in longer than 1 minute. Okay. So if that works for you, let's get into it. Here's one comment. And for all I know, some of these people are bots. Some of these people I'm sure are just trolls. I don't really care. Like I said, it doesn't offend me, but this was a video I made about the First Amendment protecting your right to hate speech. It was actually just a clip from an episode, because that's the fact, is that the First Amendment does protect your right to hate speech. But this comment says, that's fine if that's your quality of character, but don't be the typical hate speech advocate who gets butthurt when accountability comes knocking. You guys are so brave until you get the slightest pushback, and then it's, wah, you guys are meanies. Why can't I be an a-hole and face no backlash for my crappy behavior? I'm editing a little bit there, obviously, but I don't feel like this is anything I've said. I don't feel like I've ever been okay, let's just take this piece by piece, okay? First, the quality of my character. I'm not saying I like hate speech. I just want to be totally clear. I don't enjoy hate speech. I don't enjoy people who lie. But that doesn't mean you don't have a First Amendment right to lie. It doesn't mean you don't have a First Amendment right to hate speech. The problem that I have with hate speech being labeled as such and trying to make it illegal in some way is that who gets to determine what hate speech is? It's the government, right? I mean, if we're going to make a law that says this is illegal, the government has to decide where the line is on hate speech. Talking about lying, like I said, you can be a liar. You can lie to me, and there's no legal reason you can't do that. Now, there are some specific reasons where you can't do that. Can't lie to like the FBI, like law enforcement. You can't lie under oath. Those are things you can't do. But it's because we can prove what a lie is. We can prove that you're not telling the truth, for example. How do we prove hate? Like, how do we define that? So I get people's sentiment. I get that people are uncomfortable with hate speech. I get that people are uncomfortable with what people say. But my point in protecting the First Amendment is that I believe in the First Amendment right to free speech basically across the board. I mean, there are exceptions to it. We will talk about those in just a moment, but there are these exceptions to First Amendment speech for sure. No doubt. They're not generally the common ones that people think they are. I think what I want to be clear about is that I'm not pro hate speech and I'm not defending the people that spew hate speech. In fact, in the video clip, I mentioned specifically that what I like about hate speech being legal is that I can then see someone that's saying something I don't like or something that I think is evil. For example, if you are racist, I think that racism is just absolutely evil. There is no other word for it. If you think your race is superior to another race based on only the color of your skin, that is an evil ideology, okay? But I want to know who the racists are so that I can use my First Amendment right, for example, to not hire that person or not associate with that person or to use my own free speech to call out their hateful rhetoric, okay? That's what I like about free speech is that we don't have to hide, in corners of the internet or whatever to say those vile things. We can say them out loud in public if we want to. I'm not defending the vile things that people say. I'm just saying we have to defend the vile things because if you only protect the speech you like, you're not pro speech, free speech. You're just not. If you and furthermore, how do we define what we like? Because as we splinter in this country, is there anything that we'd all agree is hate speech? Is it the N-word, for example? Well, so if that's hate speech, is it only if a white person says it? Or is it if a black person says it too, like in a rap song, right? It gets very tricky, okay? I absolutely believe that, as far as being rude, it's not something I would ever say, right? But it's not something that I want to limit someone's ability to say, for example. Because one, I think it's a legitimate use of free speech, right? But also, if someone's using it in a way that I don't like, I can be like, I don't want to hang out with that person, or I don't want to work with that person, or pick it. You know what I mean? Or let's say it's the obviously other hate speech kind of thing. It's normally racism. It's normally something with LGBTQ stuff, especially in this month in June in Pride Month. It's like everything's hate speech, right? People can disagree reasonably without it being hateful. So I don't want the government deciding what is hate speech and what's legal and what's not. And case in point, a First Amendment thing that's actually going before the Supreme Court probably this month, or it's already gone before the Supreme Court, but we'll probably get a ruling on it sometime soon, is did the Biden administration coerce speech by trying to get Facebook and Twitter and the like to remove what they deemed as misinformation? So it's not just that we have a right to free speech, it's that the government cannot compel us to speak or not speak. And that's something before the Supreme Court right now is like, did the Biden administration go too far in kind of leaning on social media companies during COVID to pull stuff off their platform? I think that I think it's reasonable to say that they did, but that's what I care about free speech. The point of free speech in our framers, like minds, when they wrote it, was that they did not want the government telling people what they could and couldn't say because they wanted the government to be. They needed people to be able to call out the government when they weren't doing stuff right. They did not want a tyrannical government controlling people's lives. And they want people to be able to step up and say, no, I don't agree with what the government's doing right now, and for that to be okay. That was the idea, and the press is obviously a big part of this too. And honestly, the press is just not living up to the standard of the First Amendment. The purpose of the First Amendment with the press is that they hold our leaders accountable. They're only doing that now a lot of times if it's convenient to their sort of arguments or their platform or their side of which, with most media is left leaning, I think I'd say pretty obviously. So, I just want to be clear. I don't like hate speech. I just think it's protected by the First Amendment. And I want to talk about one misconception on free speech. The other comment I get all the time in real life and in comment sections is, well, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's actually not true at all, and we should put this to rest. Okay, this all stems from, let's explain this for just 1 second. There's a 1919 Supreme Court case, and I don't know how to pronounce the guy's name. I guess it's Schenck versus United States, Schenk. You can look it up. And this was about this guy that was distributing anti-draft pamphlets, and the question was, can that lead to a conviction under the Espionage Act? Because is that a national security situation? Whatever. During this trial, and this is during like oral arguments, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes famously wrote, or I guess wrote or said, I don't remember which one it was. I guess this was in the things, but it said, the most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. He was using it as an analogy. It was not actually part of the law. It's not in the decision. So this is an analogy. Now, I think it's an apt analogy, but it got a little bit wrong at the time too, because that case in 1919 was basically overturned in 1969's Brandenburg versus Ohio, which is the much more important case with free speech because they actually laid out, okay, when is there actually imminent danger? Essentially, when is speech inciting violence? Because they basically said that's got to be a bar. So we've got to have some sort of legal way to find where that line is. Okay. So these were the two things that they came up with in Brandenburg versus Ohio. One, the speech can be prohibited. Sorry, I cannot speak today. Speech can be prohibited if its purpose is to incite or produce imminent lawless action. And two, doing so is likely to incite or produce such an action. That's why when people call what Donald Trump did incitement to insurrection on January 6th, I'm not quite sure it meets this legal threshold. That's why I don't like that the impeachment said that in the second impeachment, because I think that bar is too high to jump over in a legal sense. Now, impeachment is not a legal procedure. That's also a common misconception. You don't have to have some sort of, there's not a weight of evidence. You don't have to, it's not innocent until proven guilty. None of that stuff is true but just for the sake of criminal prosecution, I don't think anyone could say what he was saying on January 6th at the rally incited the violence that happened right afterwards to this level where the speech can be prohibited if its purpose is to incite or produce imminent lawless action. Donald Trump didn't say anything that day that was lawless. Now, he said you got to go to the Capitol and fight, but I think very often, politicians say the word fight all the time. They don't mean physically go punch someone, and I think it's reasonable that most people understand that that's not what they mean. And there's no indication that anything he said was likely to incite or produce such action. So he didn't call for a specific action, and doing so wasn't likely to produce such action, right? Because he didn't call for someone. If he would have said, you all should go to the Capitol and hang Mike Pence, that would be incitement, and that would not be protected free speech, okay? And most of the time, this is held up. Almost every time that we've thought someone's inciting something, very rarely has it turned out to not be ruled as being free speech. So I just think we have very strong free speech precedents in this country, and I think I'm okay with that. I think on the whole, it's a good thing, okay? It's not a bad thing because, like I said, I don't want the government defining what hate speech is. Imagine for a second, because most of these arguments, I assume, are coming from my left, although there are certainly more people on the right now that are anti-free speech, I think. Mostly when it's just speech they don't like. I think everyone wants to restrict the speech they don't like. And that's part of what this comment kind of calls out for me. It says, but don't be the typical hate speech advocate who gets butthurt when accountability comes knocking. Now, accountability, I don't know what you're talking about there exactly. I don't know if we're talking about the accountability of if someone says something hateful and then loses their job. Yeah, I'm fine with that. That does not bother me so much because it's that employer's free speech right to fire someone. I actually think that we should have more free speech in hiring and firing. I think that it would be okay. And I think people should. I think there can be action. There can be consequences to speech. Just because it's free speech and can't be thrown in jail for it doesn't mean there aren't societal problems that come along with that. There's not going to be baggage that comes along with it. You should expect repercussions if you're an outspoken racist. And I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me. But imagine if you're on the left of me and Donald Trump is reelected, which is not a far-fetched thing. He's leading in all the polls in the swing states that he would need to win to become president again. Okay. Imagine Trump's reelected and he defines any criticism of him. Let's just say he says that, like, if you criticize the president, and now it wouldn't hold up under law, obviously. That's a ridiculous notion. But think of the other things that he might do. He might say that you can't, I don't know. Think of it. Do you want Donald Trump controlling what you can and can't say based on him labeling it as hate speech? I don't think you would. So I think anytime we give the government power, you should think of your worst enemy in control of that power and ask yourself, do you want that? We're way too short-sighted in this country where we think that our team is going to be in power for forever when we make these laws, and that's just not the case. That's why I think it's really important that we set up our laws and our systems to, A, protect individual liberty, and B, not empower the bureaucracy or executive branch to, like, without any checks and balances. We need checks and balances from voters. We need checks and balances from other branches of government. We need accountability, transparency to some degree. I think we might have too much transparency now. In some regards, we don't need cameras, I think, all throughout Congress. I don't think it's actually helping that body function well or healthily. But, imagine Donald Trump telling you what hate speech is. And maybe it's no longer about protecting minorities. Maybe it's about protecting rural voters. Well, you can't call it a flyover state. That's hate speech. I'm just saying that sounds ridiculous, but it's not really when you think about it, okay? Because like I said, a lie, like we can say you have the right to lie to people, but you don't have a right to lie to the FBI. And we can write that down in law because we can say, well, the FBI would have to prove that you're lying to be able to get you on that obstruction charge, right? Or if you lied to under oath, for example, in a court of law, they'd have to prove that you were lying to be able to convict you of lying under oath and send you to jail for it. And I think that these are provable things, but hate speech and where's that line, we can't really prove. Okay. So that's my further expansion on hate speech and free speech. And I will always defend it. Even the people that I totally disagree with and I think are gross, I will defend it unless I think it's hitting one of those two things where it's inciting violence of some sort. Okay. All right. Number 2. This is talking about, I did a little short about Congress, actually getting something done and passing the bills to fund Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel, and the 4th bill that actually banned TikTok. I mean, the so-called TikTok ban. It's really a forced selling of it, but whatever. And obviously Republicans in the MAGA world were up in arms about this. And I was just pointing out the fact that, like, hey, look, Congress actually got together, figured out how to pass a bill and passed a bill. Like they're actually doing something. We can talk about whether you agree with it or not. And a lot of people do disagree with this, but the most common way that they disagree with it is they say it is not their job to spend my wages outside the USA. Well, I hate to break it to you, but it actually is their job, according to the Constitution. So let's just look at the relative piece of information here. That's actually not it. Let's just go back to this. Okay, so that didn't work. Let's see. Where is that? Let's see. Let me get rid of this 1 second. Got too many windows open, which is always the case. Okay, let's try that again. Let's see if this is the right window. Yeah, that's the right window. Okay, so here is the United States Constitution, just in case you wanted to take a look at it. Article 1, Section 8, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Okay, so plainly, Congress actually does have the legal ability to collect taxes and to then spend that money. They've got to make a budget. It's like the Congress's job to make the budget, okay? They chose to make this part of the budget. Now, it is absolutely your right to remove your representative or senator that you disagree with their vote. You can vote for someone else when they're up for re-election. That's how this works, okay? But it actually is their job. And sometimes their job is to spend money, not just in the United States. Believe it or not, we've always spent money in foreign countries. It's always a thing. Now, we can have an argument about whether we should or shouldn't. but it is their job. Now, let me tell you a little bit why I think it is in our best interest to do so when it comes to Ukraine and Israel and whatnot. Okay. So I do think actually that we can spend money outside of this country in the interest of the United States. I'm not saying that's always what the case is. Like, for example, if we're spending millions of dollars on something that actually has no connection back to the United States whatsoever, I'm anti that. I don't have any examples of that right now, but I know I've seen them all the time, like general wasteful spending kind of stuff. But when it comes to Ukraine specifically, which is really where their problem is, by there I mean the MAGA kind of side of republicanism, is they just don't like Ukraine because Trump doesn't like Ukraine. Okay, that's really what this all boils down to. And they didn't want to, but they come up with all these excuses. Oh, how can we spend money in Ukraine when we've got all these problems here in the United States? That's a fair objection, except that my point is that I think spending money in Ukraine is a direct United States interest. Okay, and here's why. We had a treaty in the 90s that said basically post the Cold War, Soviet Union breaks up. There's still some little countries that have nuclear weapons. We don't really love the idea of that. So we reach an agreement with Ukraine that says, hey, we're going to have your back. If you get rid of your nuclear weapons, we will back you if someone invades you. Essentially, we say, we will defend you if you give up your nuclear arms. And there's some other stuff in there too, right? Okay. And obviously, I'm jumping forward and making this oversimplified for the sake of, I'm not an expert on Russia-Ukraine stuff. I know the bullet points though, okay? So we do that. I think that we've got to hold up our end of that bargain. And when Russia then invades Ukraine, I think we've got to at least have their back and say, okay, we'll get you weapons. That's all they're asking for. They're not asking us to come fight. They're not asking for soldiers. They're asking for intelligence help, and they're asking for weapons. Weapons which we have in old stockpiles for the most part. And most of the money, when we talk about the money that's going to Ukraine and Russia, honestly, all the money that's going to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, for the most part, we're sending them weapons which are in our stockpiles, and then we are paying defense contractors in the United States to replenish those stockpiles. That's really, for the most part, what this money, the vast majority of the money, that's where it's going towards, okay? So it's not like we're just sending piles of money to Ukraine. That would be foolish, in my opinion. We do send some of that, not very much of it. Almost all of it is weapons. Weapons that they've asked for because they're like, we need air support. We need these kind of missiles. We need, they need all these kind of strategic weapons. And honestly, we've been, I think, too slow to get them to them. That's maybe a different argument. But the point is, I think we got that 90s treaty. That's a reason we should back them. And we're deteriorating the Russian military without having to send any troops in. So it costs us nothing but, by the way, very small percentage of the budget. So the over the last couple of years, we've spent basically 5% of the defense budget. So the Department of Defense budget is 13% of the entire fiscal year's budget. Okay, so our military spending is 13% of our entire budget, and 5% of that 13%, which is 0.65% of the entire budget of the United States. That's what we've sent to Ukraine. And by sent to Ukraine, we've sent them weapons. We're really just sending that money to Department of Defense contractors who make us new weapons and planes and things like that, okay? I think 0.65%. First of all, I've not heard a lot of fiscal responsibility of like complaining about all the other spending that's actually causing problems. Our biggest problem with the debt and spending is Social Security and entitlements. And Trump and Biden are both saying we're not going to touch either one of them. And because they're going to be dead and gone when those go insolvent. I mean, Medicare is maybe going to go insolvent by 2028. Social Security, I think, is 2033. And by insolvent, what that means is that we no longer have the amount of money coming in that has to go out, because as baby boomers retire and there's less people our age and younger that are working, there's not enough money going into Social Security to pay out Social Security. Benefits will cut to 75% of what they're being paid right now when that happens, if we don't change anything, which means if you are a senior citizen that's living on that Social Security money, and let's say you just, for the sake of it being a nice round number, you're used to getting $1,000 check a month, it's just going to change to $750 a month. That's significant, and that's going to be a huge problem, right? We're either going to have to raise taxes on those payroll taxes, or we're going to have to cut benefits, or some combination of both of them. But we can't just do nothing, or that's what's going to happen, okay? And neither Trump or Biden wanted to do anything about it. That's what's causing our giant deficits. That's what's causing these giant debts. It's not that we are spending 0.65% of our entire federal yearly budget to go aid Ukraine to kind of, weaken Russia. I think that's worth it, especially if Russia, Putin wants to like get the Soviet Union back together. That would border right on our NATO countries. We have NATO, obviously, is another thing a lot of people have problems with, and that's fine. We can talk about that, but we're in NATO right now. And frankly, we're the only ones that have benefited from NATO in the past. We're the only country that's called on others to help us defend ourselves after we were attacked on 9/11. It's not been used any other time. So I don't want there to be an invasion of Poland and us have to go send our troops over there. And now it's like blood and treasure that we're having to spend. So I think spending a little bit of treasure now is worth and is in our US interest. I don't think it's completely detached. I would say the same for Israel and Taiwan. Taiwan, if China invades Taiwan, it'll cause a global economic collapse. Almost every chip for every electronic thing that you ever use, and by the way, these are in your cars. These are obviously in your smartphones and kind of every electronic thing you use, right? They're in your refrigerators now. Those are made in Taiwan. And if China invades, there's basically already plans for those buildings to be blown up so that China can't control that technology and control the chip manufacturing for the whole world. That would cause a lot of problems. Remember during COVID when we couldn't get chips and there were just cars on lots, you couldn't get cars, you couldn't get any kind of new stuff because we didn't have the chips. That's going to happen on a much larger scale if China invades Taiwan. So it is worth beefing up Taiwan's defense, in my opinion. Israel, similar situation, but for a different reason. They're our ally. They've been our ally. They're a democracy surrounded by people that want to eliminate all of them from the face of the earth. I think we should support people that want to have a country with a democracy. I'm not saying their democracy doesn't have problems. I certainly have lots of issues with their administration and the setup of their government. There's lots of things I would change, but that's up to the Israelis to determine. And if they want to get rid of Netanyahu and vote someone else in, have an election, that's up to them. And I freely say that they should do whatever they want. That's up to them. But we should support the democracy in general because I think it's good for the world. I think it's good for the Middle East. And you'll notice it's pretty obvious that Iran, we don't have like the paper trail that says this, but I mean, October 7th probably happened because of the normalizing relationships, at least in part, between Israel and Saudi Arabia and Israel and Jordan. And some of these Middle Eastern countries are realizing, you know what? We benefit a lot financially and stuff if we don't fight with Israel and we just trade with them and work with them. Like good stuff happens, And you saw that in Iran's attack of Israel, where they actually launched those missiles. You saw Jordan actually help swat some of them down. Now they're just saying they weren't defending Israel. They were like, that stuff was in our airspace and it's all right to knock it out of our airspace. But by proxy, you're defending Israel, right? And so you are seeing some of that tide turn. I don't want to say that every country in the region hates them, but they are largely hated by those people. So I think it's worth supporting Israel too. We can have a discussion about that. Like I said, mostly this comes from the MAGA side that just is anti-Ukraine because Trump is anti-Ukraine because of the first impeachment. And I guess because he's likes Putin. I don't know. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's kind of where I'm at on it's not their job. It absolutely is their job. And if you don't like the way they're spending money, by all means, talk to your congressman, tell them what you don't like, tell them how to vote, tell them what you do and don't like. I'm all for having a discussion on there are reasonable people that are more isolationist than I am, for sure. And I'm this is something I've probably changed more on over the course of 20 years. Really longer than that, call it 30 years. Because growing up in the 90s, it's kind of like peace and prosperity, post-Gulf War, and then 9/11 kind of changed a lot for me mentally. I'm 18 years old when 9/11 happens. That was sobering, right? And then I think that we made real mistakes in Iraq and Afghanistan. I do not think we handled those things. I don't think they were executed well. I think they were bad. I think Afghanistan was more justified than Iraq in hindsight, but both were bungled. Okay. So those left me with a taste of like, maybe we shouldn't do this kind of stuff. Like, it seems like we're not doing it very well. These like regime change kind of situations. So I'm generally against that, but we're not asking for regime change in these places. We are supporting our allies. That's what we're doing in this case. I think supporting Ukraine, supporting Israel, supporting Taiwan is totally different than the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And I think it's fair to say that. And so we can have discussions on whether we should be in these wars, whether we shouldn't. I'm totally fine with that. Okay, so graphic 3, let's go to that. It's another comment. close the border. This also kind of goes back to the closing. This is the other argument that comes up with the Ukraine stuff. It's always, well, how can we spend money in Ukraine when we can't even secure our own border? We should do that first before we do anything else. I don't completely disagree with the sentiment in the sense that the border is an absolute mess, okay? No doubt that it absolutely is a mess, okay? But Republicans had Democrats by the balls on this thing, frankly. I mean, just to put it bluntly. Democrats wanted Ukraine funding. There were more Republicans that didn't. Well, the majority of Republicans still wanted it, okay? But some of them realized, they could use it as a bargaining tactic. This is negotiation kind of 101, right? They could say, okay, you want that? Well, we want border security because you guys have really messed this up. And by you guys, we really mean Biden. Biden undid a bunch of stuff via executive order, which is why we have the border problem we have right now. It's not because the law changed. We haven't changed our immigration or border laws in a very, very long time. Decades, okay? We had the opportunity as conservatives to do so. And they sent James Langford to help negotiate this stuff. I'm not saying it's a perfect border bill, but we had the opportunity to make stuff into law that would have prevented future Democratic presidents from, by executive order, essentially opening the border. That would have been law that it would have held him incapable of doing that. Again, when you give someone power, imagine your worst enemy doing it, okay? Imagine, we don't have to imagine it. We saw Joe Biden basically with a stroke of a pen essentially open the borders. We're just letting people come in. We don't even, so many people are coming across. We don't know all of them. We don't know their names. We don't have IDs. We're letting people just enter the country into an asylum process that's going to take a decade. I think that's unreasonable. Okay. Republicans had a lot of wins. If you would have told someone 15 years ago, hey, Republicans are going to get a bill through that Democrats couldn't do anything about amnesty. It doesn't give any amnesty. There are triggers that automatically close the border based on the number of people that cross, of encounters and stuff. I think that you would have been like, wow, they must control every branch of government. And no, it's just, we could have had that. Trump decided to squash it because he didn't want this coming up in an election year. He didn't want Biden to potentially get any kind of win in an election year. He wanted to be able to hang the border around like Joe Biden's neck like an albatross. And to be fair, it should be hung around Joe Biden's neck like an albatross. It absolutely should be. He's trying to make some adjustments right now in those executive orders that would potentially stop that flow. Yeah, frankly, it's a little too late, in my opinion. But, so we had the option to do that. And by we, I mean conservatives, Republicans, the right had the opportunity to chain that to this Ukraine funding. And we didn't. And you look at that. Ukraine got the funding anyway. So what did you get out of it other than the ability to, I don't know, sit on your high horse and demand something perfect? Trump claims we're going to get a better border deal when he gets reelected. Well, not necessarily. You have to win the House and the Senate, and not just the Senate. You really have to have a supermajority in the Senate, which you're not going to have. You're not going to be able to get past the filibuster, which he'll probably try to get rid of, and people will probably go along with it because there are enough sycophants in the Senate now to do that, probably. But he's going to have to compromise with people, and there's no bargaining chip now. We had this bargaining chip. I think the smarter move, honestly, would have been, I think the better move for Trump, not that I'm, why am I trying to give Trump advice? He doesn't care what I think, but I think the better move would have been to push the bill through, pretend to be the author of it, get it signed, and then on the campaign trail, you could be like, I fixed the border that Joe Biden broke, and I'm not even the president right now. I'm not even in power right now, but I got this done. And I think it would have worked. I think he would have been able to look, I can do more for the border even when I'm not the president. So you should elect me. It would have been a better move. Honestly, he could have taken all the credit for it, Biden, and not given Biden any of it. He could have spun that for sure. He can't even think 2 steps ahead. When people think Trump is playing 3D chess, I disagree. If he thinks he's going to be able to get stuff done, he shouldn't be sending MAGA people out to attack Larry Hogan, for example, who they need him to win that Senate seat, okay, if they want to control the Senate. That's just simple math of if you want Republicans to control the Senate, you need Republicans to win their elections. You shouldn't be dogging on people just because they don't come out and full-throatedly defend your innocence in this New York trial or whatever. These are just all things that really bother me because, like I said, he's not actually thinking ahead. He doesn't care about the party. He does not care about conservative values or these issues. He just wants to win. And then he probably for his own nefarious reasons. And Obviously, that's me speculating, so maybe that's not fair. But that's what I think about this. When everyone comes back at me with, "Hey, we got to close the border. We got to deal with our border first." I I think I agree with you that the government is generally so bad at everything they do that I don't trust them. Like they're the last resort. They're the last people I want to give control of something to. But there are certain things that the government has to do. The government is actually in charge of the border. We can't privatize the border. We can't privatize the military. There are certain things the government has to do, and I do agree they should do those things better than they're doing. But that doesn't mean they can't do other things at the same time. It actually is in our government's interest to have foreign policy, dollars and cents that go around, or who do we support, who we not, who are we working with, trade partners, all this kind of, like we're supposed to be able to do more than one thing at the same time. So yeah, let's secure the border, but I think we can do two things at the same time. I don't think this is actually the problem that people think it is. All right, let's go to another one. It's not your job. Okay, so this is this is one of the things that's my biggest problem with Trump, and my biggest problem is that is with Christians supporting him in a way that they're defending him morally. Okay. So I had a little short that I said Trump thinks Christians are stupid when he was hawking a $60 Bible at them and pretending that I think his pretending to be a Christian is frankly transparently false. I just don't think there's really anything about Donald Trump that indicates to me that he's Christ-like. Okay. So he's hawking this Bible. It infuriates me because it just hits all. I don't like I'm a Christian. I do not like the conflation of the two as far as it's fine for your religion to shape your political views. I don't think it's okay for your political views to become your religion. And I think that's pretty much what's happened with a lot of Trump supporters. Not all of them. I think it's totally reasonable for you to have voted for Trump in 2016 or 2020 or even this year in 2024. It's not somewhere I can get yet, but it's reasonable to go, I think Biden is too dangerous or too old, or what the Democrats have done and the Democratic agenda, you think that's more dangerous than Trump is. But it is another thing entirely for you to be a Christian and then come at me and say, it's not your job as a Christian to judge someone else. Okay, because that's what this comment says. It's not your job as a Christian to judge someone else. I disagree with that theologically. I'm not going to totally get into the weeds here because this is a political show. You probably don't want to hear me wax on about my religious beliefs, but I don't think that that's actually true. And I also don't think you believe that as the person that commented this, because I bet you've judged people on the left. I bet you judge Joe Biden. So why is it not fair to point out that Donald Trump is morally repugnant? Okay. You can vote for him and still say that at the same time. I think that's reasonable, right? It's not unreasonable to say, hey, I'm going to vote for the guy, even though I think he's morally bankrupt. It's also not unreasonable for you to say, I think he slept with a porn star and paid her off while his wife was at home with their months-old son. And I think that's reprehensible behavior, but I'm going to vote for him because I think he's got better policies than Joe Biden does. And I think Joe Biden has other reprehensible behavior. But that wouldn't bother me. We can have that discussion, and I might try to persuade you otherwise, or you might try to persuade me to vote for Trump. That's fine. We can have that discussion. Happy to. But when you defend him morally and pretend that he's, like, what fruits of the spirit do we see in Trump? Love? No, it's vengeance. I mean, he's literally running on retribution. That's not love. Joy? There's nothing joyous about the way he complains about stuff all the time. He's the victim in everything. Peace? He doesn't seem very peaceful, I wouldn't say. Patience? Certainly does not seem patient. Kindness? Who's he kind to? Who's he ever been kind to? Goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control? None of these things I see no Christ-like behavior in Trump whatsoever. Doesn't mean you can't vote for him. It's just like, don't defend him. And this is sort of a similar one is when it comes back with, he without sin cast the first stone. This is the other comment. Okay, is that how you feel about, this is just the way that you make an excuse for a guy that you can't excuse his morally bad behavior. That's really what this boils down to. And I just wish people would be honest and say that, yeah, his behavior is gross, but I'm going to vote for him anyway. Just like, tell me that. I'm okay with that. I might argue with you about it and say, here's why I don't think you should do that or something, but that's more reasonable. But don't come at me and pretend that you are a better Christian because you're like, oh, I'm not going to cast the first stone. I think it's really important in that story specifically. Let's just get into it a little bit. Is that the Pharisees are trying to bring this woman who's been caught in adultery, not because they want to stone her, but because they want to test Jesus. They're trying to figure out some way to get Jesus on this. And he, of course, writes in the dirt and then says, like, he without the first stone, he without sin cast the first stone. And then he writes something else in the same. And then people start leaving. And eventually everyone leaves. It's also interesting that the oldest people started first. I think they left that in there for a reason. I think they were probably wiser and realized this was dumb, right? And who knows what he wrote, right? We don't know. But at the end of the whole story, Jesus tells her, hey, look, no one's here to condemn you. Go and sin no more. He still tells her not to sin. He still points out her sin. I think it's a ridiculous notion that we don't point out when we see bad behavior in people, especially our leaders. There obviously are differences between what I'm supposed to do as a Christian and what I'm supposed to do as a citizen of the United States. And it's absolutely clear to me in the Constitution that my job as a citizen of the United States is to check power, is to make sure that I'm calling out and I'm holding them accountable when I think that they've done something wrong, or when I think they're morally bankrupt, or when I think they're gross, or whatever the situation is. If I think something they've done illegal, or if I don't agree with their policy. These are things that we're supposed to do as citizens. I don't think the framers of the Constitutions ever imagined a situation where we would just knee-jerk reaction, defend our side while attacking the other side all the time. And this is wild too, because for it to come from the right, from MAGA land, to ever say that, like, hey, I shouldn't judge people. And I'm just assuming here, because this is generally what I hear from that crowd, is like, how dare you judge him? Like I said, it seems like a cop-out to me. I also know that most of those people are always willing to not just say that they disagree with the left's policies, which I obviously do, but that they have ill intentions, that they're evil, that they're trying to destroy the country, or they're trying to brainwash your kids or something like that. I think there's certainly some of that nefarious stuff that goes on the left. I think some of the stuff with, like, the transgender stuff with kids and stuff is disturbing the level of, I mean, I would call it brainwashing. I'd call it child abuse in some situations. Okay. But so we're happy to assign that as being evil. We're happy to call that out, but you won't call out the problems on your side. I just think it's very hypocritical. I don't like it. Okay. And thanks for the comment, Kevin, by the way. Eyes purple crying. I can't see the emoji in the software I'm using, but I know which one you're talking about, and I feel the same way. So yeah, I just don't think that that's where we're at. I don't think that we can do this kind of hypocritical stuff and think that it's actually doing good. Okay. So anyway, that's some comments. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me. I do appreciate you being here and hope you found some value in it. If you did, I'd love if you rated it wherever you're listening, whether that's on, YouTube, you can like it. If that's on Spotify, you can 5-star. If you're on Apple Podcasts, which most of us still call iTunes because it shows how old we are, but I'm trying not to call it iTunes, for goodness sake. But you can rate it. That actually helps me a lot. You can also share it with a friend. That helps me a lot too. You can follow me on Instagram and YouTube at The Homeless Conservative. You can feel free to reach out with any questions, topic suggestions, or disagreements you have with me. Like I said, I'm happy to have a discussion here. I'm happy to talk about these things. People can reasonably disagree. It's the vilification of everyone that drives me nuts, okay? You can also email me at blake@thehomelessconservative.com. I appreciate you being here. I will catch you next time.